Everything you've been taught about wealth, it's wrong. Not a little bit wrong. Not mostly wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. Look, if I took every dollar out of your bank account, every stock, every bond, every cryptocurrency, would America still be wealthy? Most people would answer, no, of course not. They're wrong. Because money isn't wealth. Money is a way of measuring wealth. It's an instrumentality, and like only sometimes, actually. Sometimes it's merely a claim on wealth. And sometimes it's neither. If tomorrow every stock exchange on earth shut its doors, look, if tomorrow, I repeat, if tomorrow every stock exchange on earth shut its doors, would farmers in America stop growing wheat? Would ranchers stop raising cattle? Would factories stop making steel? Would engineers forget how to build bridges? Would machinists forget how to run a lathe? Would electricians suddenly forget how electricity works? You getting me here? Of course not. Of course this wouldn't happen. Now, let's reverse it, okay? Suppose every farm disappeared. Suppose every factory shut down, okay? Suppose nobody mined copper anymore, Kennecott copper. Nobody refined oil there in Texas or wherever they do it. Nobody produced semiconductors. Nobody built trucks. Nobody generated electricity. Would Wall Street save us? Would derivatives? God, don't get me started. But would derivatives feed us? Would cryptocurrency power a hospital? Would options contract harvest a crop? No! The answer is no! Because wealth begins long before finance. Wealth begins when one human being changes the order of nature. A tree becomes lumber. Better. Trees are nice. Lumber's better. Iron ore becomes steel. Sand becomes glass. Now that's really better. Silicon becomes a computer chip. Ideas become invention. Knowledge becomes productivity. That's wealth. That's wealth right there. Everything else, that's just accounting. I'm Jake, and this is Politics by Jake.
This is Politics by Jake. Most commentators merely report events. Jake decodes and reveals the hidden systems beneath the headlines. He exposes the enduring, sometimes generational patterns that govern history, politics, economics, and human behavior. Jake names the unnamed. He brings into focus the things that we're hiding, sometimes even in plain sight. And now, here's Jake.
Politics by Jake, just before we start here, glad to have you here. We'll talk about that in a minute. On Politics by Jake, I break down political and economic reality so you can see what's really happening. And this helps you because it shows you how to position yourself. If you want me to apply these situations and this information directly to your situation, I do offer private one-on-one strategy session. The link is in the description. Finally, you can find Politics by Jake on YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, really most major podcast platforms. Everything you've been taught about wealth, it's wrong. Not a little bit wrong. Not mostly wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. Look, if I took every dollar out of your bank account, every stock, every bond, every cryptocurrency, would America still be wealthy? Most people would answer, no, of course not. They're wrong. Because money isn't wealth. Money is a way of measuring wealth. It's an instrumentality, and like only sometimes, actually. Sometimes it's merely a claim on wealth. And sometimes it's neither. If tomorrow every stock exchange on earth shut its doors, look, if tomorrow, I repeat, if tomorrow every stock exchange on earth shut its doors, would farmers in America stop growing wheat? Would ranchers stop raising cattle? Would factories stop making steel? Would engineers forget how to build bridges? Would machinists forget how to run a lathe? Would electricians suddenly forget how electricity works? You getting me here? Of course not. Of course this wouldn't happen. Now, let's reverse it, okay? Suppose every farm disappeared. Suppose every factory shut down, okay? Suppose nobody mined copper anymore, Kennecott copper. Nobody refined oil there in Texas or wherever they do it. Nobody produced semiconductors. Nobody built trucks. Nobody generated electricity. Would Wall Street save us? Would derivatives? God, don't get me started. But would derivatives feed us? Would cryptocurrency power a hospital? Would options contract harvest a crop? No! The answer is no! Because wealth begins long before finance. Wealth begins when one human being changes the order of nature. A tree becomes lumber. Better. Trees are nice. Lumber's better. Iron ore becomes steel. Sand becomes glass. Now that's really better. Silicon becomes a computer chip. Ideas become invention. Knowledge becomes productivity. That's wealth. That's wealth right there. Everything else, that's just accounting. I'm Jake, and this is Politics by Jake. And today we're going to challenge one of the biggest economic myths of our time. Because if we don't understand where wealth actually comes from, we'll never understand inflation, we'll never understand government spending, trade, manufacturing, or why the civilizations become rich while others become poor.
More of Politics by Jake after this.
And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.
And now, Politics by Jake continues.
All right, and we're back, and welcome to the show. I didn't get to this at the beginning of the show, but this is Politics by Jake. I am Jake, and I welcome you to the show. And I welcome you to 2026. I welcome you to the fight. We've got a big election coming up, and it's not, I don't know if it's 100 days because frankly, I haven't calculated it, but it's close to 100 days. We're really getting there. And there are all sorts of alarm bells. Trump and his administration, they know that things are going bad. They know the polls. They see how bad things are. They see that they're going to lose. They know that they're going to lose. And you have to ask yourself the question, and I encourage you to do so. What will someone who's already tried to overthrow the government violently and also legislatively, January 6th, which forever after January 6th, 2021, which forever after, unfortunately, it should be known as Acclamation Day or Affirmation Day, but it's not known as that anymore. It's the day when an American president tried to overthrow the government of the United States and enlisted a certain group of people to do so, and who, when he got back into power, has done everything he could to excuse and pardon those people. It's completely ridiculous. And as I have said, he is a destroyer, and and the people with him are proceeding apace. And I wish that we could talk about that more today, why that is. But we don't really have the time. But I also wanted to tell you that on Politics by Jake, I break down political and economic reality so you can understand, what's actually happening in the world. And in this way, you can position yourself better. But if you like the analysis, you want this in your personal life or your business or your personal financial situation, I do offer private one-on-one strategy sessions. And the link is in the description. Moreover, you can find Politics by Jake on YouTube, iHeart, Spotify, Podbean, most major podcast platforms, really, I am on. And so with that, let's continue, shall we? All right. There's an old saying on Wall Street: money never sleeps. That's true. I was just in the studio today and a guy was talking to me about it. He was wondering because I was in the office on Saturday because I do the show, of course. And he said, "Boy, there you go. Way to go. Money never sleeps." And I said, "Yeah, no, it doesn't. It never sleeps." So that's true. But here's what Wall Street doesn't always tell you: money doesn't produce anything either. People do. Ideas do. Labor does. Capital equipment does. Technology does. Human ingenuity does. Money? Money simply helps organize those things. And when it does that well, it's one of civilization's greatest inventions. When it doesn't, it becomes one of civilization's greatest distractions. And here's where I think that we've gone off the rails. We've started measuring economic success by the movement of financial assets instead of by the expansion of production capacity. Listen to the evening news. The market gained 600 points. Wonderful. What does that tell us about the price of tea in China? What does that actually mean? Did America produce more steel today? Did we manufacture more aircraft? Did we cure another disease? Did we invent a better battery? Did we become more productive? Or did people simply decide to pay more for pieces of paper that they already owned? Those are not the same thing. Yet we've trained ourselves to think that they are. Now, before, someone says, Jake, there goes Jake again. He's against investing. No, not even remotely. Investment's absolutely essential, but investment has a purpose. And its purpose must be to finance production. Its purpose is to build factories, to finance research, to develop technology, to increase productivity, to create the next generation of wealth. And when investment becomes detached from production, something dangerous happens. Speculation becomes a business model. Speculation has a peculiar characteristic, creates excitement, creates headlines, it creates fortunes, it creates weekend shows where people talk about it ad nauseum. Sometimes almost overnight it creates fortunes, and that's intoxicating. It really is, but it's also deceptive. Because speculation doesn't ask, what can we build? It asks, what can I sell to someone else for a higher price, you see? Those are profoundly different questions. One creates wealth, the other transfers wealth, sometimes efficiently, sometimes usefully, sometimes necessarily, but they are not the same thing. Okay? Economists have a phrase that I like very much. They speak about increasing the productive capacity of an economy. And that's a wonderful expression. I like that expression because productive capacity is real. A better machine, a better process, a better seed, a better software program, better engine, a better education. Those things permanently increase what human beings are capable of producing. That's real wealth. Everything else depends on it. Think about Henry Ford. Ford didn't become wealthy because he traded Model T stock certificates. He became wealthy because he discovered how to build automobiles faster, better, and cheaper than anyone else thought possible. He expanded production, the financial success that came afterward. The Wright brothers, Thomas Edison, James Watt, Eli Whitney, Steve Jobs. Whether you admire all of them or not is kind of besides the point. Each of them changed the productive capacity of civilization. That's why history remembers them. Not because they moved money around, but because they changed what people could do. Now, here's where politics enters the picture. Governments have an enormous influence over incentives, tax policy, regulation, monetary policy, education, energy, trade. Every one of those decisions answers one fundamental question. Are we rewarding production or are we rewarding speculation? And once you begin asking that question, the headlines suddenly look very different. You stop asking, did the market go up today? Instead, you begin asking, did America become more capable today? That's the question that determines the future, not the next quarter, not the next election, because history is remarkably consistent. A civilization that honors builders, inventors, engineers, farmers, craftsmen, manufacturers, and productive enterprise grows stronger. On the other hand, civilizations that become fascinated with financial genius eventually discover something uncomfortable. Paper prosperity has a way of disappearing the moment reality comes calling. And that's what happened almost nearly a century ago. And when we come back, we're going to talk about that.
We'll return to Jake in just a moment.
And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.
And you're listening to Politics by Jake. Stay with us.
All right, and this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. Welcome to the show. And at Politics by Jake, I break down economic reality and political reality so you can understand what's actually happening and how to position yourself accordingly. If you want that applied directly to your personal or business financial situation, I do offer private one-on-one strategy sessions, and the link is in the description. And finally, you can also find Politics by Jake on YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, and really most major podcast platforms. Okay, now moving on. History has a nasty habit. History nasty sometimes. It ignores our theories. And sooner or later, it insists on reality. And that's exactly what happened in 1929. Now, most people think the Great Depression began because the stock market crashed. They talk about the crash of 29. It didn't. The stock market crash was a symptom. It was not the disease. It was more like a severe recession. And I'm going to talk about this. Think about it this way. If the thermometer reads 104 degrees, breaking the thermometer doesn't cure the fever, because the fever was already there. The market simply revealed it. During the Roaring '20s, America experienced extraordinary innovation: automobiles, electricity, telephones, household appliances, radio. Real production was exploding. That's wealth, real production. But something else was happening at the same time: speculation. People weren't just investing in productive companies, they were borrowing money to buy stock because they were so compelled. They believed prices could only go in one direction, up. Does that sound familiar? We've seen that movie more than once. Tulips, railroads, dot-coms, housing, crypto, different centuries, same psychology. What do these have in common? They're all bubbles. And what's the only thing a bubble can do? Burst. So some of these are different century. Tulips is different. That was a long time ago. It's the same psychology. People stop asking, what is this actually worth? And they begin asking, what can I sell it for next week? And that's not investment. That's momentum. And the momentum works until it doesn't. When confidence finally cracked in October of 1929, stock prices collapsed. But here's the important point. Falling stock prices didn't destroy America's ability to produce. Factories were still standing. Farms were still there. The engineers, they hadn't forgotten engineering. The machinists, they still know how to machine steel. The knowledge hadn't disappeared. The productive capacity of the country, still largely intact. So, why did things become so catastrophic? I'll tell you why. Because finance and production had become dangerously disconnected. Credit froze, banks failed, businesses couldn't obtain financing, consumers stopped spending, fear replaced confidence, and the financial system, which is supposed to support production, began preventing production. So imagine the circulatory system in your body, okay? Your heart doesn't create muscles. It doesn't create your brain. Doesn't create your lungs. Its job is to move blood where it's needed. And, money works much the same way. Finance is the circulatory system of an economy. When it's healthy, productive enterprise flourishes. When it clogs, everything suffers. And the tragedy of the Great Depression wasn't simply that the markets collapsed. The tragedy was that a financial breakdown crippled productive people who still knew how to produce. Factories sat idle. Not because they couldn't make things, but because the financial machinery had seized up. Workers who wanted to work couldn't. Businesses that wanted to expand couldn't. Communities that had been thriving suddenly found themselves paralyzed. That's why it's so different. That's why it's so dangerous to confuse finance with wealth. Finance is indispensable, but finance is not the economy. Finance is the servant of the economy. The real economy is made up of millions of people creating value every single day, growing food, building homes, designing software, repairing trucks, teaching children, developing medicines, making civilization function. I'm doing a lot of enumeration here, but this is really important. This is really economics 101. You all need to understand this because there's wild things happening in the world today. So all these things make civilization function. When we forget that, we begin treating financial indicators as though they were reality itself, and they're not. They're measurements, sometimes good measurements, sometimes terrible ones. But they themselves are never the thing that's being measured. And after 1929, another chapter began. One that most Americans have never heard. It involves central bankers. It involved international finance. And it involved a man named Lord Montague Norman, whose influence reached far beyond Britain. And if you want to understand how monetary policy became one of the most powerful and one of the most least understood forces in modern politics, stay with me, because that's where we go next.
We'll return to Jake in just a moment.
And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.
This is Politics by Jake. Stay with us.
Okay, we're back. This is Politics by Jake. At Politics by Jake, I break down political and economic reality so you can understand, what's actually happening, how to position yourself. If you want that applied directly to your situation, I do offer private one-on-one strategy sessions. The link is in the description. Finally, you can find Politics by Jake on YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, and really most major platforms. Okay, and so we're back, and here we go. And this segment might aptly be called The Men Behind the Money. So, most Americans can name a president. Many can name a general. Some can name a Supreme Court justice, but very few can name the people who control the world's financial system. And yet, those men often exercised influence that rivaled heads of state. And one of them was Sir Montague Norman. Unless you've studied economic history, you probably have never heard of him. But for a quarter of a century, he served as governor of the Bank of England. He wasn't elected. He didn't campaign. And didn't appear on television. Well, I was a little older for television, but on the radio. Yet presidents, prime ministers, finance ministers, and central bankers paid very close attention to what he thought. And why? Because money is power. It's not wealth. It's power. The power to influence interest rates. The power to influence credit. The power to influence investment, the power to influence employment, the power to influence entire national economies. Now, let's be careful here. This isn't a conspiracy story. It's actually more interesting than that. It's about incentives. Central bankers are usually trying to solve, real problems. Sometimes they're remarkably successful. Sometimes they're spectacularly wrong. But whatever their intentions, their decisions ripple through every corner of the economy. When interest rates rise, borrowing becomes more expensive. Businesses delay expansion. Families postpone home buying. Investments become more selective. When interest rates fall, borrowing becomes easier. Expansion accelerates. Construction increases. Consumers spend more freely. Those decisions affect millions of people who have never heard the names of the people making them. Montague Norman lived during one of the most turbulent financial periods in modern history. The First World War had shattered the international monetary system. Governments had borrowed huge sums. Currencies were unstable. Everybody wanted to return to what they considered as normal. And that normal was the gold standard. See, gold had provided discipline. A nation's currency ultimately represented something tangible. This was the old way of thinking. Governments couldn't simply create unlimited money, though, without consequences, or at least not for very long. So many leaders felt that the answer was obvious. Go back, restore the old system, reestablish confidence. But there was just one problem. The world had changed, and trying to enforce or force the post-war economy back into a pre-war monetary framework, it just proved extraordinarily problematic and difficult and intransigent. Britain, in particular, struggled. The pound was restored to a value that many economists believed simply too high. What did that do? Made British exports more expensive. Their industry suffered, the employment suffered, production suffered. And again, notice the pattern, will you? Monetary decisions, however well-intentioned, have consequences in the real economy. Factories don't care about theories. Workers don't care about monetary abstractions. Reality always gets the final vote. And that's why I keep insisting that production comes first. Finance exists to support production, not the other way around. When monetary policy strengthens productive enterprise, it serves civilization. When productive enterprise is forced to serve monetary policy, the priorities become inverted. So history suggests that that's rarely a good thing. That's when that happens, that's rarely a healthy arrangement. So eventually, the financial strains of the interwar years became too great. The old system broke apart. The Depression deepened, and another world war followed. And when that war finally ended, world leaders gathered with one overriding question. If the old monetary order failed, what comes next? And the answer that they arrived at would shape the global economy for decades. It was called Bretton Woods. And whether you realize it or not, you're still living with its consequences today.
More of Politics by Jake after this.
And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.
And now, Politics by Jake continues.
Okay, this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. On Politics by Jake, I break down political and economic reality so that you can understand what's actually happening and how to position yourself. If you want this applied directly to your situation, I do offer private one-on-one strategy sessions. Links in the description. And, finally, you can also find Politics by Jake on YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio. We're on that too, Podbean, and, most major podcast platforms. Okay. All right. By the time the Second World War was coming to an end, one thing had become painfully obvious. The old financial system wasn't coming back. The gold standard, as it had existed before World War I, that was gone. The Great Depression had exposed its weakness. The war had transformed the world's economies. Leaders knew they couldn't simply rewind history. So in July of 1944, representatives from 44 nations gathered at a quiet resort in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their mission wasn't simply to end a war. It was to prevent another economic catastrophe. Now, think about what they had lived through. A world war, 2 world wars, really, hyperinflation in some countries, deflation in others, bank failures, currency collapses, mass unemployment, another world war. They weren't interested in academic debates. They wanted stability. They wanted a monetary system that businesses could rely on, one that would encourage trade instead of chaos. And the agreement that they reached was ingenious, at least for a time. The United States dollar would become the world's reserve currency. Other major currencies would be tied to the dollar. and the dollar itself would be convertible into gold at $35 an ounce. Uh, Not, for ordinary citizens, but for foreign governments and central banks. In effect, the dollar became the bridge between gold and the rest of the world's currencies. So why the United States? Because in 1944, America stood in a unique position. Its industrial base was intact. Oh, its industrial base was humming. Its factories had been expanded by wartime production. Its economy was the strongest on earth, and it held an enormous share of the world's gold reserves. And in many ways, Bretton Woods just reflected a simple reality. The United States wasn't just financially strong, it was productive. Its farms fed much of the world. Its factories supplied much of the world. Its engineers and scientists, manufacturers, and workers had demonstrated an astonishing capacity to produce. And once again, notice the relationship, will you? Financial leadership followed productive leadership. Not the other way around. The dollar became dominant because the American economy had earned extraordinary confidence. That confidence rested on real production, not merely on financial markets. For more than 2 decades, the system had worked remarkably well. International trade expanded, war-ravaged economies rebuilt, Japan recovered, Western Europe recovered, global commerce accelerated. It wasn't perfect, No monetary system ever is. But compared to the instability that had preceded it, Bretton Woods brought order. And yet, success carries its own problems. I mean, as the world economy grew, more and more dollars circulated outside the United States. Foreign governments accumulated enormous dollar reserves. And eventually, a difficult question emerged. Were there now more claims on American gold than America could actually honor? And that question, it wasn't theoretical. It struck at the heart of confidence itself. Remember what we've been talking about through today's program. Money is a claim. Confidence is the glue that makes the claim meaningful. When confidence weakens, people begin asking to redeem the claim. That's exactly what started happening during the 1960s. Foreign governments increasingly wanted gold instead of dollars. And, the math became uncomfortable. The promises exceeded the available metal. And history was preparing another turning point. And in 1971, one decision made in a matter of minutes changed the global monetary system more dramatically than anything, almost anything, since Bretton Woods itself. We'll talk about that after the break.
We'll return to Jake in just a moment.
And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.
And you're listening to Politics by Jake.
All right, this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. And at Politics by Jake, what I do is I break down political and economic realities so you can understand what's actually happening and how to position yourself. If you want that applied directly to your personal or business financial situation, I do offer private one-on-one strategy sessions. The description is in the link. And also, I would add that you can find Politics by Jake on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, iHeart, Podbean, and really most major podcast platforms. All righty. So, on August 15th, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on national TV. And I actually remember this. Most Americans had no idea that they were about to witness one of the most consequential economic announcements of the 20th century. Speech wasn't dramatic. There were no flashing headlines, no emergency sirens, no declaration that the world had fundamentally changed. But it had. Nixon announced that the United States would no longer redeem dollars for gold. Temporarily. That was the word. Temporary. More than 50 years, we're still living under that temporary decision. I could say things about that. I could talk about de Gaulle. De Gaulle wanted his gold. Anyway, but here's the part that often gets overlooked. That didn't happen overnight. It happened in stages. Silver, for example, began disappearing from America's coins. And then, by 1968, all of a sudden, Americans could no longer redeem their silver certificates for silver, because that's what dollar bills used to be. You used to get a dollar bill before that time. It would say silver certificate on it, because you could redeem it for actual silver. Now, think about what that meant. For generations, a piece of paper represented a tangible claim on something. You could exchange it for a precious metal. Have you ever heard of such a thing? That's the way it was. And now that relationship was ending. Most people, they barely noticed. And then came 1971. Under Bretton Woods system, foreign governments could still exchange dollars for American gold. And that was the final remaining link between the dollar and what is called, I say specie. That's the Latin pronunciation. Americans would say specie, S-P-E-C-I-E, specie. I say specie. Go figure. Go sue me. 8 years of high school and college Latin. What am I going to say? I got to use it somehow. Anyway, but there was a problem. The number of dollars circulating around the world had grown much faster than America's gold reserves. Too many claims, not enough gold. Foreign governments began asking for the gold they had been promised. De Gaulle of France was like that. That's why I mentioned de Gaulle. He wanted his gold. He wanted the gold. And America faced a choice. Continue redeeming dollars until the gold was gone, or suspend convertibility. And this is why, by the way, I don't know if you hear this now, because I really think we're kind of around the bend on this. But it used to be that people used to say things like there's no gold in Fort Knox. And that they guard it because they pretend like it's there because they have to. But actually, all the claims have been paid and there's no gold. That's where this comes from. So, as I was saying, America faced a choice. They could continue redeeming dollars until the gold was gone, or they could just say, we're not going to do this anymore. Or in other words, they would suspend convertibility. That's what they would do. And Nixon chose that. He chose that second option. And with that decision, the last connection between the American dollar and a precious metal disappeared. First, it was silver in 1968, and then it was gold in 1971. And the door didn't close all at once. Like I said, it closed one hinge at a time. The first hinge was silver in 68, and I remember that too. And then gold. And when the gold window closed, the door on specie or specie, if you prefer, closed for good. And from that moment forward, the world's monetary system rested not on redemption, but on confidence. Now, think about that, will you? What gives a dollar value today? It's not redeemable for gold. You can't do that. It's a Federal Reserve note. It's an indebtedness. A note is a debt. A note is a debt. And that's what we get today. We get debt notes. A Federal Reserve is a debt note. What gives a dollar value today? It's not redeemable for gold. It's not redeemable for silver. It isn't a warehouse receipt for anything tangible. Its value ultimately is going to rest on confidence. Confidence that other people will accept it. Confidence that the United States will honor its obligations. Confidence that tomorrow it will still function as money. Now, confidence, it's an incredibly powerful thing. Every economy depends on it. But confidence, it's also so fragile. It can take generations to build and only moments to lose. And that's why governments and central banks devote so much effort to maintaining it, because once confidence begins to crack, financial systems become unstable very quickly. Now, think back, will you? Think back over everything we've discussed today. Money isn't wealth. Finance isn't production. Markets are not factories. They're tools. They're useful tools. They're necessary tools. But tools nonetheless. And the real foundation has never changed. Never changed. The farmer, the engineer, the machinist, the scientist, the entrepreneur, the truck driver, the welder. Yeah, I'm going to list these because I'm trying to make a point here. The software developer, the teacher, the nurse, the people who transform the order of nature. That's the key. The order of nature into something more valuable than it was before. Those are the people who create wealth. Everything else depends on them. And if we reward productive enterprise, the financial system has something real to support. And if we neglect productive enterprise, no amount of financial engineering can or will permanently compensate for that. History has basically demonstrated that lesson again and again and again. Empires become prosperous through production. They become wealthy through innovation. They become stable through sound institutions. And they begin to decline when they mistake financial success for productive success. So, the next time someone tells you the economy is booming because the stock market reached another record, just will you do me a favor and ask yourself one simple question? What are we producing? Because that's the question that history always asks. And history is usually a much tougher grader than the markets. I'm Jake. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with me. Until next time, remember, politics makes a lot more sense when you understand the history behind it.